Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core studio. Welcome to the show. One morning this week, I woke up with a very strange question on my mind. Is it possible to build a functional Commander deck for $1? I mean, I built decks on small budgets before, but none quite as small as this. So I got to work trying to figure out just how I was going to make this happen. I needed to find an incredibly cheap Commander that could work with incredibly cheap cards and still function well. So, on this episode, I'm going to take you through my process and how this deck turned out. But a quick disclaimer before we get started. The prices I'm showing this episode are based off of Scryfall searches, which come from TCG Player. Just like in my other decks, the cost of basic lands don't count. In all honesty, this wouldn't be anywhere near possible if they did. And obviously, the cost of shipping the deck would automatically put the cost over $1, so that's going to be ignored as well. Shipping 100 cards is going to cost more than $1 on its own. Still, I thought this was a fun challenge and thought experiment to try to find out if I could make a deck that ends up being under $1 for the cards. So with all that said, let's jump into it. So my first step was to try to figure out what commander would probably be best when it comes to what kind of cards I've got access to. So I went on to Scryfall and searched for every single card that has a price of exactly 1 penny. If I'm building a deck on a $1 budget, and I know the commander probably isn't going to be 1 penny itself, every other card pretty much has to be 1 penny. So every single card that I'm going to be putting in this deck, I am limiting to just 1 cent. Again, outside of the commander and outside of basic lands. So upon scrolling through these cards, there's something that I definitely noticed pretty quickly, and you might notice right away just by looking at this image. Out of the 548 cards that are just 1 cent, the vast majority are creatures. In fact, according to Scryfall, 382 of them are creatures. So from this, I gathered that I need to pick a commander that revolved around creatures. Also, because of this limited card pool, I determined that I would need a commander that is more than 1 color. If the commander was just 1 color, I would have very few options as to which cards went in the deck and which cards I just had to put in the deck because they fit the color. But I also determined that I probably couldn't have a commander that is more than 2 colors because, yeah, mana fixing on a budget this small isn't really a thing. Or at least I should say incredibly efficient mana fixing isn't a thing. But with a 2-color commander and a well thought out distribution of basic lands, I would be fine. So my next step was to look through commanders, so I decided to limit my search to just commanders that were 25 cents or less. So if I kept all my other cards to 1 penny a piece, I would still be within my budget, again not including the cost of basic lands. After scrolling through the commanders, there were actually a couple of decent options, but one to me stood out above the rest. Out of the cards at my disposal, I thought that this one had the most potential. So I did a quick search to confirm this by looking through the cards that are within that commander's color identity. After looking through the green and white cards in my disposal, I confirmed my selection. So the commander that will be leading my $1 deck is Shauna Sisay's Legacy. Shauna is a 0/0 human warrior for green-white. She can't be the target of abilities your opponents control, and she gets ++1 for each creature you control. Shauna is a commander that works perfectly under these restrictions for a lot of reasons. First off, she has a very low mana cost. Since in our 99 we're only including cards that are 1 penny, we can't really include good ramp cards. In fact, as you'll see when we get further into the episode, ramp cards can be really hard to find at this price. So for a deck that's going to heavily rely on its commander, we need to make sure that we can get it out. So at 2 mana, we can get her out early and often. Another great reason why Shauna is a good pick for this is that she also protects herself in a way. Now, it's not perfect protection, but she basically has hexproof from our opponent's abilities. Of course, if it was straight up hexproof, that would be better, but again, at this price, we really can't be too picky. This kind of protection is better than nothing. And also, Shauna can be an absolute powerhouse once we've got the board set up. Again, at this budget, we're going to have to rely on a lot of creature cards, and Shauna gets more and more powerful with the more creatures that we get out. Once we're set up, she can be a huge threat and get a lot of damage through. Even at this kind of a budget, we can turn her into a 2-shot kill. And of course, with the perfect circumstances, we can turn her into a one-shot kill, though we're not going to be counting on that. And of course, I am not claiming that this is any kind of a high-powered deck. On the smallest of budgets, this deck is low power, but that doesn't mean that it can't only function but also compete against other low-powered decks. So what's all in this deck? Well, of course, I'm going to be including the full deck list in the description below. On this episode, I'm going to highlight some cards for you to illustrate what this deck wants to do. So now let's talk about the first of our 1-cent cards. This deck wants to be very low to the ground for a lot of reasons. So we're going to be utilizing some cheap creatures like Doom Traveler, Seagate Banneret, and Kitesail Cleric. Doom Traveler says when it dies, create a 1/1 white sphere creature token with flying. Again, our commander benefits with the more creatures that are in play. So the fact that Doom Traveler replaces itself when it dies means that our commander doesn't miss a beat. And then Seagate Banneret is a 1/2 that has pay 4 and a white, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Now this might seem like not all that powerful of an effect, but the more and more creatures that we get in play, the more damage that we can dish out when we pump them all. And again, since we can get this down early and cheaply, it's going to pump our commander quickly. And another cheap creature that can help us out in a different way is Kitesail Cleric. It's a 1/1 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, tap up to 2 target creatures. So we can get this down early if we need to, but if we've got some extra mana later, we can utilize it to tap some creatures. And that might be just enough to help us get our commander through and dish out a lot of damage. And then we've got some 1-mana creatures that can pump themselves with Codespell Cleric, Wildwood Tracker, and Basking Rootwalla. Codespell Cleric is a 1/1 with Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, if it was the second spell you cast this turn, you put a +1 counter on target creature. So if we want to, we can actually use this to pump itself, or we can pump something else like, say, our commander. And then Wildwood Tracker says when it attacks or blocks, if you control another non-human creature, Wildwood Tracker gets +1/+1 until end of turn. We've got a big mix of humans and non-humans in this deck, so usually we can meet that requirement. Speaking of non-humans, Basking Rootwalla is a lizard and a really cute one at that. It has Madness for 0 and pay 1 and a green. It gets +2/+2 until end of turn, activates ability only once each turn. So our opponents need to be careful when swinging into or when blocking this cute little guy. And then at 2 mana, let's highlight a few as well with Drowsing Tyrannodon, Checkpoint Officer, and 9th Bridge Patrol. Drowsing Tyrannodon is a 3/3 again for just 2 mana, but it's got Defender. Except as long as we've got a creature with power 4 or greater, Drowsing Tyrannodon can attack as though it didn't have Defender. And Shauna is going to very quickly get to that amount. And then Checkpoint Officer can be helpful in a different way. It has pay 1 and a white, tap target creature. So this can either protect us from a creature that's going to be attacking us, or we can tap down opponent's creature that would be their blocker. So it's yet another way for us to help get Shauna through. And then 9th Bridge Patrol starts off small as just a 1/1, but it can become really big. It says whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1 counter on 9th Bridge Patrol. Now with this deck, I definitely tried to limit the number of creatures above 2 CMC as much as I could. Or at least I should say that I tried to limit the ones that don't have a lot of utility. But I decided to include Rising Populace, which is basically another 9th Bridge Patrol. It says whenever another creature or planeswalker you control dies, put a +1 counter on Rising Populace. So again, like 9th Bridge Patrol, this can become a big threat for us later in the game. But next up, let's talk about different kinds of creatures. So unfortunately, there aren't a lot of 1-cent cards out there that make tokens, but we're going to be including the ones that we can. Glint Sleeve Artisan might cost 3 mana, but it does have Fabricate 1. So when it comes into play, we can make a 1/1 servo. Again, the more creatures that we have on the board, the bigger our commander gets. So we've also got Propeller Pioneer, which also has Fabricate 1, but also has Flying. And then Valorous Steed is a 3/3 with Vigilance that makes a 2/2 with Vigilance. And then we've also got some different types of creatures that aren't technically creatures with Funeral Longboat and Renegade Freighter. Vehicles can be very effective in a deck like this because they are hard for our opponents to kill with, say, a board wipe. So even if they wipe the board, we still have a creature to be in play. So Funeral Longboat is a 3/3 with Vigilance that has Crew 1. And Renegade Freighter has Crew 2, and it's a 4/3, and when it attacks, gets +1 and gains trample until end of turn. Not the best of vehicles that are out there, but we'll take what we can get. And speaking of making do, like I mentioned before, there aren't really a lot of options for ramp when it comes to cards that are 1 cent. But again, we will take what we can get with cards like Humble Naturalist, Rosethorn, Acolyte, and Spectral Searchlight. Humble Naturalist can tap to add 1 mana of any color, but we can only spend this mana to cast a creature spell. The vast majority of spells in this deck are creatures, so we are completely fine with that. And then Rosethorn Acolyte has the Adventure, Seasonal Ritual, add 1 mana of any color. So this can help us filter our mana, which can help us get our commander down early if need be. And when she's in play, we can tap her to add 1 mana of any color. And then there's Spectral Searchlight, which has tap, choose a player, that player adds 1 mana of any color they choose. Now, obviously, we're most likely going to be picking ourselves and ramping with this, but you know, we might just use this for politics if we can. Again, we've got to make do with what we can get. And we've also got to make do with our card advantage spells as well. Port Cost Vine is a 0/3 defender that just costs a green, and it has pay 2 and tap and sacrifice a creature defender or draw a card. So if we need to trade out a defender, including this one, for a card, we can. And then Eager Construct has when it enters the battlefield, each player may scry 1. Now, yes, I know this does help our opponents, but again, we will take what we can get. And speaking of helping out an opponent, there's Farsight Adept. It has when it enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each draw a card. So yes, we are benefiting another player, but hopefully this can gain us some goodwill, or we can make a deal with this. And of course, we're also going to be making do when it comes to removal. So we're going to be utilizing cards like Broken Wings, Journey to Oblivion, and Wing Shards. Broken Wings says destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. So this is a very flexible card which can help us out in a lot of circumstances. And speaking of flexible, there's Journey to Oblivion, which says when it enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until Journey of Oblivion leaves the battlefield. On top of that, this spell is going to cost 1 less cast for each creature in our party. Now our commander is already a warrior, so it's going to cost 1 less with her in play. But in this deck, we've also got clerics as well as a wizard, so hopefully we have those in play as well. And then I was actually pretty surprised to see that Wing Shards was a 1-cent card. It's an instant that says target player sacrifices an attacking creature, and it's got Storm. So this can be a good way to deal with multiple creatures, especially if an opponent's already cast a spell or 2 before they attack. And again, the less creatures that our opponents have, the less they can block with, and we can get some commander damage through. Speaking of which, we can actually utilize some of our creatures to help our commander get a ton of damage through. For example, Exalia's Keeper is just a 2/2 for 2, but later on in the game we can pay 7 and a green to tap it and sacrifice it, and target creature gets +5/+5 against trample until end of turn. That's a huge boost that we can utilize to get a lot of damage through with our commander. And then Gale Swooper is a 3/2 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature gains flying until end of turn. And giving our commander flying is a fantastic way to get her through. But the best way of these to get damage through with Shauna has got to be Trusted Pegasus. It's a flyer, and when it attacks, target attacking creature without flying gains flying until end of turn. So that's a repeatable way to help her get through. And then another card that helps out over time is Fully Grown. It says target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn, put a trample counter on it. So this is a temporary boost for our commander, but also that trample is going to stick around. And again, giving our commander trample is a very impactful thing. One card that can be even more impactful though for one shot is King Harold's Revenge. It says until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control and gains trample. It must be blocked this turn if able. So this essentially can double up Shauna's power and give her trample. That can be an incredibly deadly way to finish off a player. And of course, a simple spell like Mighty Leap that gives +2/+2 in flying can be very impactful as well. And speaking of which, we've also got some equipment that can grant flying as well with Wings of Hubris and Raven Wings. Wings of Hubris gives flying, and by sacrificing it, equipped creature can't be blocked this turn, sacrifice to begin the next end step. So flying is usually enough to get through on a good amount of players. But in desperation, or to finish off the last player, we can sacrifice this and eventually sacrifice our commander to get damage through no matter what. And then Raven Wings is much simpler. It gives +1/+0 flying, and it makes Shauna into a bird for whatever reason. So test and training can also be helpful. It's an aura that says enchant creature you control. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and trample. So though this is an aura, it does replace itself, which is great. But since we are filling the board with a ton of creatures, we can also use them to help finish off opponents as well. So we're going to have some ways to pump our entire army like Warded Battlements, Battle Shield Warrior, and Dawn Feather Eagle. Warded Battlements is a 0/3 defender that says attacking creatures you control get +1/+0. We're looking to be very aggressive with this deck, especially with our commander, so this can really help us out. And then Battle Shield Warrior has both pay 1 and a white, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. An Anthemonic creature can be very impactful in a deck like this. And then Dawn Feather Eagle says when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. So this pumps our entire team when it comes in, and it helps them attack and stay back for blocking. And of course, actual pump spells can help out as well with Stirring Address, Fortify, and Warhorn Blast. Stirring Address says target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and it's got an overload cost of 5 and a white. So this can pump our entire team out of nowhere. And then Fortify can also pump our entire team, but for a lot cheaper, but we've got a choice to make. It says choose one, creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn, or creatures you control get +0/+2 until end of turn. And then Warhorn Blast is more expensive at 5 mana, but it's going to give our creatures +2/+1 until end of turn, but we can actually cast it for the same mana cost if we foretell it. Regardless, again, we're going to be flooding the board with a ton of creatures throughout the game. So when we want to swing out with them, these combat tricks can help us dish out a ton of damage and really help us out. But now this episode is coming to a close, and I hope that you enjoyed it. So as always, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let me know what your thoughts on this deck are, and let me know if you think that there's actually a commander that would work better on this budget. Again, your options are pretty limited, but there are still a decent amount of options out there. So I can't wait to hear from you and see what you come up with. And as always, thanks again, and have a good one.